They say that football games are won in the trenches. According to a former NFL scout, NC State is going to be getting it done up front.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Wolfpack, our second episode of this Friday. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm Grayson Boone. Next to me is Kenton Gibbs. And Kenton, we're going to be talking about your area of expertise, these big men up front, I guess, oppositioning you since you are a defensive lineman. We're talking about the offensive line, and just this past week, we had a discussion on who we think has the most to gain entering the 2023 season. Your answer was Dylan McMahon, who would be shifting over to center. According to former NFL scout Jim Nagy, he's buying what you're selling. There's an article, well, not an article, but a long tweet posted by Jim Nagy on this Friday afternoon. I'll read you this top part before we get into the depth of it, but he says, quote, "Big reason for optimism this year for NC State is the arrival of transfer quarterback Brennan Armstrong from Virginia, But after breaking down tape of returning offensive linemen Dylan McMahon and Anthony Belton, he has a lot of points of emphasis here. He says McMahon, who's played all three interior lineman spots in 33 starts, is the most athletic center prospect we've seen in the 2024 draft class." I'll read a little bit more in just a second, but Kenton, would you like to take some time to gloat here on how your pick to click this year in 2023 is starting to gain some buzz?
I mean, and let's be clear about this. It was who needs to have a big year for NC State to have a big year. And Dylan and Belton have to show up here. And I'm glad that I'm not the only one to see this. I'm glad I'm not the only one that see these guys as players who they cannot be average or slightly above average if we want to achieve the goals that are before us in this season. They have to be good to dominant in order for that to happen. And the tools are there. We're talking about the raw tools and potential, especially especially with Belton. We're talking about the skills and the raw tools that are there. But with McMahon, we're talking about more of an actualized product, and that you have all this experience, all of these starts. It needs to come out. It needs to show, because, again, we're talking about now a group that should have some cohesion. We saw last year when Grant Gibson was gone, this was very much so a group without its alpha. And now we've got a new alpha who's supposed to lead in a certain way, and he's being acknowledged as a freak of nature athlete, which he is. And so, you're right. I could gloat. I love being right. You know what I mean? You can ask anybody. I love being right. You know what I mean? But with that being said, this is a situation where games are won and lost by the big boys. You know what I mean? It's very rare, very, very rare that your skill positions are the difference by and large. And even then, 9 times out of 10, it's in a negative way where it's like they're not doing the bare minimum of what they should be doing. So the buffet busters are going to be the key here. And apparently their draft stocks are on the rise. So hopefully the keys keep keying, and all of a sudden they find their way keying up into the first, second round of the NFL draft next year.
Yeah, diving in a little bit deeper into this tweet from Jim Nagy, he says, Dylan McMahon has excellent second step and redirect quickness. He's a cool recovery athlete when it comes to latching and staying in blocks. He's fun to watch getting downfield in the screen game. His overall mobility on his junior year tape reminded him of Senior Bowl alum and eventual first-round pick Garrett Bradbury when he studied him 5 summers ago when he came out of NC State. He said, needless to say, McMahon's elite weight room work that landed him on Bruce Feldman's freak list carries over onto the field. And then discussing Anthony Belton, who we're also talking about here. He says, former JUCO product Belton is still a work in progress, but NFL scouts will be enamored with his raw tools, like you just mentioned, Kenton, and developmental starter traits. Belton's NFL left tackle twitchiness is obvious just by watching him pop into pass sets, and he's also a natural bender with power and physicality. He said he's not seeing or hearing much early buzz on Anthony Belton, but he's very confident that that will change pretty quickly once the media starts talking to NFL scouts. So, you just mentioned how these games are won or lost by the big men up front. I also want to call into attention that, we're bringing in the new offensive coordinator in Robert Anae, but also I think somebody that's flying a bit under the radar as a new addition is the new offensive line coach in Garrett Touget, also joining us from UVA because he spent some time with Coach Anae there. And I just want to point out that, bringing in these two pieces that have worked together and worked in an offense in 2021 that worked so well, you're meeting up with these two pieces we already have here in McMahon and Belton. It feels to me like we have a head start. Like we're already hitting the ground running, probably ahead of where you might be just bringing in two new coaches, you could say. And so, Kenton, what are your thoughts there? How prolific is it to have these two guys that are starting to raise their draft stock, and you're bringing in two coaches that have worked together on the same system and know exactly how it's supposed to fit?
I mean, for the most part, coaches are going to be professionals and, going to know what they have to do and all that. But having guys who have history with one another, it's never a drawback. You know what I mean? That's never going to be a negative in terms of, two guys working together and having worked together well in the past. And this is a situation where there's going to be one band, one sound, right? They understand what's going on. There's not going to be a bunch of people playing different songs off different sheets of music at the same time. This is going to be a situation where, yes, this is new to NC State, but number one, your QB1 has the experience in the offense. Number two, your offensive line coach has experience with the offensive coordinator. Number three, I'm going to say this, and I know some people may get mad about this, but this is, I would probably say, the most talented set of tools that Robert Anae has ever had to work with in terms of, or at least in terms of recent memory, if you're going back to his UVA days. So with that being said, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here. And you talk about these two guys' draft stock again. It's all about what you do on the field. It's all about the performance with Belton. I've talked about it before multiple times. He has all the tools. When you watch him on tape and he's rolling, he's at his highest clip, he can be dominant. The problem is he has a long memory, and that is never a good thing in football. He has that tendency where he lets one bad rep turn into two, and then turn into those two bad reps turn into a bad series, and then that bad series turns into a bad quarter. And I think he needs to hey, I lost that rep, but it's all right. We're going to get right back to it. I'm going to trust my technique. I'm going to trust what I do and keep it rolling that way. Because, again, the first step quickness, I see it. I'm not making this up when I was talking about him having the capability of being dominant. The first step twitchiness is there in terms of pass sets, violent hands, natural bender, all that good stuff. Great. But now string it together and trust your fundamentals even when you're struggling a bit. Even when you got a bad dude across from you and he's whooped the wheels off you a couple plays, it's all right. You got to come back and do it again, brother. That's what the attitude you got to have. And as far as McMahon, I mean, we know what he does. You know what I mean? There's no surprise here. But again, in playing center and coming into the season as center number one and all that good stuff, the call for him is going to be the leader of this, not just this group, but this team. Be a leader. Show up day in, day out, and do the things that you're supposed to do, but even go beyond that. Do things that most people say are extraordinary, but the extraordinary is just doing the ordinary things extra well.
Yeah, I think it's always very easy to overlook the importance of getting it done in the trenches. It's easy to overlook the importance of, a good core of interior linemen that are able to control whatever you're trying to do offensively, because of course, all the shine is going to the quarterback, running back, and wide receivers most of the time. But I do think, in you naming Dylan McMahon as the player that has most to gain. I think we're on to something here. I definitely think we're on to something here.
We know a little bit of ball on Locked On Wolfpack. We know a little bit of ball. Not a lot, but we know a little something.
Knowers of ball, to say the very least. Up next, we're going to talk about maybe times we've known a little too much ball. But first, a word from our sponsors in FanDuel. Take your first swing sweating. Well, maybe you are sweating, betting the MLB on FanDuel and get up to 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Bet just $20 and you'll land $200 back in bonus bets, win or lose. This is all coming on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on the MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 back in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. So Kenton, candidly, this next piece here, I was influenced by another popular name in NC State sports media in Joe Giglio on his own recent launch of a podcast called Law of the Wolf. He was discussing the best wins and worst losses in the tenures of Dave Doeren and Kevin Keatts. I thought this was too good to pass up, and I would certainly love to bring the discussion onto this platform. So we're going to start with Dave Doeren first. We're both going to give our best wins, and then we'll get into worst losses. Kenton, I'm going to open it up to you first. What would you quantify your Dave Doeren's best win in his tenure here in Raleigh?
Well, and I want people to know, right? A lot of folks are going to listen to my list and say I'm suffering from recency bias. You're probably right. 17 years of playing football ain't great for the memory. So my memory's kind of cut off sometimes. No, but seriously, I take into context like what this win meant for the program and the context of a win as well, right? Because sometimes you can pull off a big upset that didn't do anything for your momentum, didn't do anything for your season, didn't do anything for your program. And it's like, that's a good upset, but people forget it happened. And conversely, with a worse loss, it's like, all right, if it's going to be your worst loss, it had to derail something. Something had to happen that I look at this and I say, oh, if this didn't happen, how different of a world will we be looking at? So with that being said, Dave Doeren's best win to me is walking into Kenan Stadium last year with little Ben Finley. And I'm gonna read an excerpt for you from CBS Sports and talking about this game last year and beating the Tar Heels in overtime. Now let me read this excerpt for you, and that'll add some context to why this game was so important here. The Wolfpack are falling apart after losing quarterback Devin Leary to a season-ending injury, while North Carolina hopes to build some momentum entering its first ACC championship game since 2015. The Tar Heels lost a heartbreaker against Georgia Tech to fall out of the CFP conversation, but quarterback Drake May will face one of his biggest tests yet. This is a revenge game after North Carolina State edged UNC 34-30 to end last season. Expect the Tar Heels to take full advantage.
Whoops.
Yikes. You hate that. Hate that for them. No, but seriously, that, and you could say like, well, they went on to lose to Maryland in the bowl game and all that, but I want to look at what that means in terms of in-state battles, in terms of all bragging rights, in terms of all the things that could have. That shows me as a coach, your team is still fighting and battling and showing up when, let's just be honest, how much did the Wolfpack have to gain by winning that game? I believe we were already at 6 wins. So
yep,
a bowl game was already secured.
7 wins at that point, but yes, same thing.
Okay, yeah, so that's what I'm saying. We were above 6 wins by that point. So we're walking into that game, and it's like, if you lose this game, what really happens? What really goes that bad if you lose that game and all that good stuff? And instead, we show up, firing, giving it to them any way they wanted defensively, making Drake May uncomfortable all night, and offensively doing just enough to secure a W. So, that's Doeren's biggest win to me.
Mine, I'm going to take you back to the year 2017. Not only do I think this is probably the most fun I've ever had personally at a game in Carter Finley? I also think it was the most impactful win for Coach Doeren, and that was the 2017 Thursday night game against Louisville and reigning Heisman Trophy winner Lamar Jackson. This was the game where we debuted our new sleek black uniforms. We were ranked for the first time in a while, and we were able to handle the talent that was Lamar Jackson at that point in time. It was we never trailed in this game. It was either tied or we were leading the whole game, dominated, more or less from start to finish. And it was punctuated at the end with a pick six from Jermaine Pratt, which I can still visualize in my mind when he stiff-armed Lamar through the uprights, through Middle Earth to seal the win there. But, that was probably, I was still a student at the time. That was probably the most fun game I've ever been to. It was probably the loudest I've ever heard Carter Finley. Maybe second place is probably the 2021 win at home against Clemson. But I think also that win was super impactful for the program as a whole, because that was probably the best win that season in what went on to be one of Dave Doeren's best years here in Raleigh. And I think that a win like that starts to raise that floor, something we've been talking about a lot here recently. It started to raise that floor because you had so many talented pieces that were truly starting to emerge kind of all at the same time. And to get that win on a big stage, on a Thursday night stage, I guess, if you will, it was a big win. And it felt amazing at the time. 6 years later, that win still feels amazing. So for me, I think that was the biggest one for Coach Doeren here in Raleigh. But now let's switch over to worst losses. What's your worst loss for Coach Doeren here in Raleigh?
Well, a not so happy moment spurred on by a young man that's now in Happy Valley. Good for him. Everybody remembers the Devin Carter drop against Miami.
Oh, man.
But that game was so much deeper than that. So much worse than, again, the context matters. That was a Miami team that was ready to implode and break. They were there. They were on the brink. They were on the cusp. All we had to do was go in and handle business. Go in and handle business. And here's the other part of why that 31-30 loss was so hurtful, so devastating in my book. You look at that situation, you look at that game, and you say to yourself, well, Kenton, if they win that game, what changes with NC State's season? That season, we went on to go 9-3 before the bowl game was canceled against UCLA. Now, let's play a quick game of what if. How many bowl games were canceled that? It was only like what?
Maybe two or three, yeah.
If we win that game, we are guaranteed to be in a different bowl game with a guarantee at a shot for a 10th win had we lost another game because we won Miami. Or, I mean, let's get really crazy here. You've won 10 games in the regular season. You're going to be going to a special bowl game at that point. And who even knows what happens against Wake Forest a couple weeks later if you don't lose that game. And now you're talking about a season in which you got the monkey off your back. You beat Clemson. You are absolutely rolling. You show up in that game after an absolute domination of Boston College on the road. If we win that game, if NC State wins that game, I very seriously, it's not beyond the realm of capability that NC State goes to the playoff. If NC State wins that game, even if we lose to Wake Forest, we still would have been in the ACC championship, which means we would have been in the ACC championship with 2 losses on the season against a highly ranked Pitt team with Kenny Pickett at quarterback. If we win that game, we could potentially end up in the playoff or at least a New Year's Six bowl. And where do we end up instead because we lost that game? A Holiday Bowl that got canceled.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very unfortunate turn of events there. I do remember that game being extremely painful to stomach and especially more so with the events that followed. But my worst loss, and maybe you can call this some recency bias, just this past year, 2022, Boston College at home on senior night. I still can't believe we lost that game. That is a game, like virtually no excuse ever. You cannot lose that game. Not just because, it's senior night, not just because of the expectations for the season before the season started. Boston College at that point in time was, I think, probably the worst team in the ACC. MJ Morris had exploded onto the scene. He was looking great. He ended up getting injured in this game. But regardless of all of that, we got off to a quick start. We were scoring out of the gate. And from that point on, it should have been head, shoulders, knees, and toes, just domination. Just never look back, never think twice. Should have been an easy win in the books. And you know what they say, you let teams hang around long enough, they're going to figure out how to beat you. And, a lot of people are still up in arms about that wishy-washy penalty called on Drake Thomas there at the end. You should have never been in that situation to potentially lose anyway.
Should have never been there.
And Kenton, I remember seeing, this is long before I was on this podcast, but I think your next podcast after that loss was Tim Beck Has to Go.
Yeah.
That was the title of it.
And here's the very interesting thing about that. Anybody who knows me knows how slow I am to call for a coach's job, to say, hey, this coach needs to go. They can't be here anymore. You played the clock against the statistical worst defense in the ACC. Instead of saying, hey, we're going to go, we're going to roll it, we're going to be aggressive, we're going to make them beat us. You said, oh, well, Not only that, they have this guy, or they had this offense, rather. They had Boston College had a very complex offensive scheme that they came into this game with. It was called the Get Zay Flowers the Ball offense, okay?
They had one play.
Now, the interesting thing about this is we, too, have a receiver that teams were struggling to check, including Boston College. And his name was Thayer Thomas. He had a pretty big catch in the first half, I believe on the first drive of the game when we scored a touchdown, and then did not have another target until the end of the fourth quarter, last drive, or maybe one more target. Tim Beck must pay for his crimes. He must do time in prison, not jail, prison.
Potentially for this reason is why he is no longer here with us in Raleigh. But yeah, that was, I'm not sure if I'll ever get over that loss, at least not for quite some time. But to tie a bow on this thing in just a second, we'll be talking over to the hardwood, the best and worst losses of Coach Keatts' tenure here in Raleigh, after a word from our sponsors. So to tie a bow on this thing, we'll waste no time in getting into the best and worst losses of Coach Keatts' tenure here in Raleigh. Kenton, I'll kick it to you first again. What's the best win for Coach Kevin Keatts here as the head coach of the Wolfpack?
You see, when I talked about how Coach Doeren fumbled off an opportunity when the team was right there on the brink, ready to implode, ready to fall apart, and Coach Keatts did not do such. Okay, Coach Keatts saw UNC last year. Oh, they came into the season as number one. Look at how the mighty have fallen. Look at how they don't like each other. It's public. Look at all this stuff. And he made it a point to win that last game against UNC, which was vital. It was vital that we got that game, because that, although it wasn't a huge win in terms of like our net rating and all that in terms of getting us in the tournament, it was a big win for the sake of, like Jaquavian Smith said, you don't have to wear blue to have success if you want to play here. If you're from North Carolina and you want to stay here in North Carolina. And even beyond that, it's the fact that this is again a game that you had to win, and we did. And so there's value in winning a must win. There's a ton of value in that for me, especially when your must win is against a blue blood. So, that's his biggest win.
Best win I have for Keats is also against UNC, but this is in the year 2018 on the road in overtime. This was actually in year one of Coach Keats. And I believe it was Markel Johnson and Al Freeman. This is the Al Freeman game, as I remember it, went absolutely nuts. I think this is a game Al Freeman went like 7 for 7 from 3, just took over that game. But I'll always remember that game, not just because of Al Freeman, but because I remember being so excited in year 1 of Coach Keats going on the road and immediately wasting no time in announcing his presence. I guess not just the ACC, but in the state of North Carolina. And I would like us to kind of get back to that level of excitement, hopefully this year, and being able to go on the road and get it done against our rival schools again. And, just reestablish ourselves here in the state of North Carolina. So that was my best win for Coach Keats here in Raleigh. But now worst losses, equally, the joyful. Now we're going to talk about the painful. Kenton, what's your worst loss for Coach Keats here in Raleigh?
I'm a cheater. I'm going to cheat here. I'm going to let you know that right now. That's I don't like playing by the rules and whatnot. And so I'm going to break the rules right here. Coach Keats's worst loss was not one loss. It was a combination of losses.
Okay. I'll accept this.
The trilogy of losses last year to Clemson was god awful. And let me explain to you why I say it was god awful. Okay. Last year we lost, I want to say, let me get you the exact number here. Last year we lost 1, we lost 2, we lost 3 and 4, 5 games by double digits last year. 5 games by double digits. 3 of them came against one team. 3 of them came against Clemson. Like that is ridiculous. The closest that we had was a 14-point loss the first time we played them. The second time we played them, it was a 25-point loss. And you say to yourself, oh, it can't get worse. It can't get worse than a 25-point loss. LOL JK, 26-point loss in the ACC tournament. And that is why that trilogy there, just like all of these trilogies and reboots we see on TV and in movies today, trash, a god-awful trilogy to see.
They say it's hard to beat somebody 3 times, but Clemson did not seem to have any trouble at all with us last year in 2022. But my worst loss for Keats, and this is an interesting one because I actually don't think you can really put much of maybe any of the blame on him. This was the 2019 home loss against Virginia Tech, the infamous game where we scored a grand total of 24 points. And I was in attendance for this game. I still can't believe what I saw that day. I remember thinking at halftime, we had 14 points or 10 points. I was like, well, it surely can't get any worse than this. And then somehow it got worse than that in the second half. We shot, I think it was 16% field goal percentage, 7% from 3, something I hope to never experience again in my life, but truly just one of those games where you remember where you were because of how simply ridiculous the end result was for NC State. And it hurt especially too, because we were also ranked. Who we beat the week or the game before is escaping my mind, but it was a big win. And so coming into this game against Virginia Tech at home was a big game. And the end result of scoring just 24 points and being, effectively the laughing stock of college basketball for at least a week. Basketball pain like that is not something I have experienced and hopefully never have to experience again. But unbelievable game.
For a reference on how bad the offense was in that game, if we scored a point for every minute that we've been talking since the start of this episode, we would have beaten NC State at this point. We would have beaten them.
It's funny. I remember after that game, I went home and I lived close to a basketball court myself. And I think I took this is just me messing around, but I shot until I finished with a better shooting percentage from 3 than NC State did. And it only maybe took me about 5 minutes. So it was just unbelievable performance that we hope to never have to go through again. But that's going to do it for us here in our second episode of this Friday. Kenton, any final words?
Yeah, I think that this is, again, the Buffet Busters are what make championship teams. Okay, you rarely ever. The last time that I remember a really good team or championship team that didn't have a good offensive line, I want to say was the Auburn Tigers with Cam Newton. But if you look at that team, the defensive line was an absolute animal to the point where it's like, if you got D Ford and Nick Farley and all those guys, you might be able to get away with not having a good offensive line. Also, there's some guy named Cameron back there at quarterback who seems to be doing good things. But the reality is the big boys are where these games are won and lost. And speaking of Doeren and Keats, please don't make us update the worst loss list. Please.
Hoping for more good wins and less worse losses here moving forward. But again, that'll do it for us. Thank you all for tuning in yet again to an episode of Locked on Wolfpack. Everyone have a very safe 4th of July weekend, however you choose to do so. We will see you all here next week. Go Pack.
Go Pack.